Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. But the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. So, in the last chapter, we saw Athaliah usurp the throne of Judah by slaughtering all the male heirs, with the exception of Jehoash, the same person. With the exception of him, who he was kept safe by his aunt, Jehosheba, and then taking him to Jehoiada, the chief priest, he's able to be kept safe in that. She raised this reign of idolatrous terror for 6 years until Jehoash is 7 years old. Now he goes on to reign in Jerusalem for another 40 years. And we see that he does what is right in the sight of the Lord all the days, not of his life, but all the days in which Jehoiada is in his life. So as long as that chief priest Jehoiada is around, he continues to do right. But the second he loses him, he loses his ability to continue walking out his faith in God. He loses his ability to stay anchored in what is right and what is wrong. The one thing he, of course, didn't do is take away the high places. Now, in the last installment, we saw that they destroyed the temple of Baal. They killed the high priest of Baal. They've gotten away from the Baal worship. So the high places are not being used for idolatry. Not mainly, I would assume. I'm pretty sure there's probably there are people here or there that do things they shouldn't be doing. But for the most part, the people who are using these high places are using them to sacrifice and burn incense to Yahweh, to Jehovah. They are using it to burn incense to the one true and living God, but they're doing it incorrectly because they've been told to do it at the temple. This is the problem with the northern kingdom, is they're still, even though they're a different kingdom, they are supposed to go down to the temple, and they refuse. Because although they have these borders that they're trying to uphold, at the same time, the different tribes had different borders, and they still had to unite with all the issues the different tribes had to go to the temple to worship, to go to the tabernacle when that was in standing order. So there's no excuse for the northern kingdom not coming to the temple and instead falling into the idolatrous worship that they did with the 2 golden calves in the high places. So Jehoash doesn't get off the hook for not taking down the high places, for not taking that away from his people. But really, it's this idea that he only walked rightly when Jehoiada was there. He only did what was right when this man was directly instructing him. And it's an interesting thing to see because it shows that this young man was raised from the time he was basically 1 until he was 7 in the temple. He was raised by Jehoiada, basically. He was raised around godly people. He has all the instruction put into him to walk perfectly with, well, not perfectly, but you know what I mean. To walk rightly with God in a way that most other kings did not have. If there was going to be one unbelievably godly king, this should have been it. This should have been the young man. But he only does it as long as Jehoiada is there. It's like watching these people deconstruct from Christianity. And they say, well, we did all the right things. I was a pastor's kid, and we were at church all the time, and we heard all the sermons, and we had the commentaries, and we did this, and we did that, and we were instructed in this way. But the moment that they have a little bit of freedom away from that godly influence, they're gone, doing their own thing. Jehoash is having all this instilled in him, all of it being told to him. But the moment the father figure, the priest, is gone, and he now has to act on his own, he stumbles away. He falls away and doesn't continue his walk with God in the way he should be. He is no longer doing what is right in the sight of the Lord. We often are told, and some people take this proverb to be they take it to be a promise. In that, you raise up your children if you're an admonition of the Lord, and when they grow old, they will not depart. And I'm pretty sure I just amalgamated 2 verses, but the idea is there. So people take that proverb as a promise when it's a principle. And it's a principle we see walked out in Scripture often. That we see that it's a principle and not a promise because we see people raised up in godly fashion and fall away at the first temptation that they have. Judas walks with Christ. He is one of his disciples. He does miracles in the name of Christ. But because Christ isn't who he thought he was, Christ doesn't live up to what his expectations of the Messiah are to be, he turns on him and sells him out and gives in to the temptation of Satan. You have Jehoash here, walking right, doing what is right in the sight of the Lord, as long as Jehoiada is there to hold his hand. But the moment he's not, he starts to fall away. And that's why, as much as we can build into our kids, as much as we can be example for our kids, their walk with Christ is not our walk with Christ. As much as we desire them to walk with Christ, they will have to make that choice for themselves. And if you're a Calvinist, then of course you just believe that God just deigned from the beginning that they'd burn in hellfire. So regardless of how much we put into them, they will have to make their own choices. They will have to resist their own temptations. And the principle is, if you build into them these bulwarks of faith, that even if they stumble, they'll return. But that's a principle and not a promise. The promise is that those who continue to walk with Christ, those who are his elect, those who are sealed, those whom are in his hand, no one can pull away. Those people who are truly of Christ will stay with Christ. That's the promise. The principle is that we are to make our children in every way possible for us to be one of those people. Only God knows what their decisions are going to be. And because of his foreknowledge, he has sealed them. We don't know that. So we are to walk out our faith, showing them how to walk out theirs. And Jehoiada does that with Jehoash. But Jehoash can't continue as soon as he's out. It's one of those things I've said to my children often. It says in I think it's like over there, overzealous father. One of the things I've said to my children often is, your walk is not my walk. And one of my goals is that when I'm no longer here, you will continue to walk with the Lord. There will come a time when I am no longer alive, or even not even going that dramatic, that you've moved out on your own as an adult and you have to walk with the Lord on your own, that I am not there to hold your hand through it. And my one fervent prayer is that that doesn't stop. That you continue to love the Lord the way you love the Lord right now as a child. You continue to love the Lord in that way as you grow older. Because as a child, I can see how much you love the Lord, and I want that to continue. I can't relate to my children in that way. I did not have the Lord as a child. I did not have an understanding of the Lord as a child. I did not have the teaching of the Lord as a child. I had nothing of God outside of cultural Christianity, which still existed in the nation in the 80s. Even though it was weird and kind of pagan. Because you had Christians talking about having seances and having guardian angels and whatever weird nonsense came out of the Catholicization of the nation. But that's all I had. I didn't come to Christ until I was well into adulthood. I was almost 40 years old, so I knew what it was like to not have Christ and then have Christ. My children won't have that knowledge. They won't have that pivot point of life. And I pray that they never have a pivot point, that they just continue to walk out faithfully to Christ. But we don't know. And as parents, we can't let that lack of knowledge dishearten us. We just have to trust in the principle that if we feed into them, that will sustain them later in life, as they now need to feed themselves. We see instances all the time in Scripture where that did not work. That principle, not a promise, we see it not work out for the best. But that doesn't mean we aren't supposed to continue to try to walk it out. That we aren't to feed in and do everything we can for our kids. I see so many parents who are afraid to feed in this way because they're afraid of their children resenting it. But once again, there are plenty of people who go through this and they never resent it. And they look back on it praising the Lord that their parents did this. Then there are some who walk away. That's an individualistic thing. We can't judge our actions and how well we fulfill God's commands based on what we anticipate our children may be doing in a worst case scenario. We need to just follow the principles that the Lord has set out before us. And pray that our children continue to walk in the way that they're walking now. But during the time of Jehoiada, he was good. After that, if we get to the end of the chapter, we'll see that doesn't always last. But here we get to a little bit into his thing. He's not a child at this point any longer. But the temple had fallen into disrepair. It had fallen into damage. They refer to it in the New King James also as dilapidation. Like it's not been cared for. You had 3 consecutive reigns of people who were not godly and did not care. Jehoshaphat did, but after years of neglect, the temple now needs to be repaired. And Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the dedicated gifts that are brought into the house of the Lord, each man's census money, each man's assessment money, and all the money that a man purposes in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it themselves, each from his constituency, and let them repair the damages to the temple wherever any dilapidation is found. So he's saying, you're going to use the tithe money that's been coming in, the census money, all this stuff that comes in that the Hebrews are required to pay. You're going to take that and use that money to repair the damages to the temple. People have been taking in the money, but they haven't been upkeeping the house of God with it. So take that money and use it for upkeep now. Now it was so, by the 23rd year of King Jehoash, that the priests had not repaired the damages of the temple. So, not exactly 100% sure when he had said that originally, to use this money. But we're told 23 years into his reign. So if this is one of the first things he says, it's been 23 years. But it's been at least a very long portion of time that is recorded that of his reign, that he's told them, hey, you're going to use the money to repair the temple, and they have not been doing that. So the 23rd year of King Jehoash, that the priests had not repaired the damages to the temple. So King Jehoash called Jehoiada the priest and the other priests, and said to them, why have you not repaired the damages of the temple? Now therefore do not take more money from your constituency, but deliver it for repairing the damages of the temple. Basically saying, all the money you're getting, now you're going to use that. Now he's saying, all the money you're not going to keep taking. You're not going to hold on to the money anymore. You're going to deliver the money now. We're going to do this in a different fashion. We tried this system, and it obviously ain't working. So now we're going to try a different situation. We're going to try a different thing. Because in a lot of ways, this sounds as though the people in other cities around Judah, the constituents are giving it to the priests, they're giving it to the Levites, and instead of that money coming back to the temple as it should, they're not bringing it back anymore. The damages aren't getting repaired. There's something going on where they're donating the money, but the money's not being used for what it's donated for. And we see this a lot in all kinds of areas with all different charities, that the charities become so top heavy between advertisement and board salaries that a lot of your money ends up going to the charity, but not to the service the charity was created to serve. And you'll see that where nowadays you'll see charities even give breakdowns of, oh yes, 90% of your charity money will actually go towards the thing. And it's understandable that for large things, if it's gotten so top heavy, maybe your people do deserve a bit of a salary if it's causing so much of their time to be taken. They probably do deserve to have some recompense for that. But if it's so top heavy that you're donating $100 and only 30 of that is even going to the cause because the overhead of the charity, then the charity is effectively useless. Because more money is going into the structural cost of the charity than to the charity itself. And in a way, this seems to be what the priest is doing. It's either corrupt or just mismanagement, that the Judeans are giving the money to the priests and the Levites, but it's not making it to what it's supposed to be done, and that's the repair of the temple. And now 3 more years have passed of dilapidation on the temple. And the priests agreed that they would neither receive more money from the people nor repair the damages of the temple. Then Jehoiada the priest, still the God-honoring priest, is still in the life of Jehoash at this point. Then Jehoiada the priest took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar, on the right side as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priest who kept the door put there all the money brought into the house of the Lord. So basically, he's created a treasure chest. He's created a tithing box, which a lot of churches have. You know, passing around a collection plate isn't something a lot of places do anymore, especially as your church gets bigger or post-COVID, I've noticed. So they put donation boxes, and you just drop your donation in. You drop your tithing box, your tithe in the box, or whatever you want, offering box, I should say. You drop your offering in the box, and then people will come collect it later. So this is what he's setting up. An offering bin. And what people bring, they're going to drop in that. It's a locked chest. It's got a hole that you can drop it in, but you can't get it out. And that's going to be delivered and used solely for the reconstruction and repair of the temple. So it was, whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came up and put him in bags and counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. So this much money seems to be like when they felt that it couldn't, you're having trouble putting the coins in, then they'd come up, they'd empty it, they put it in bags, and then they'd take it. The high priest and the king's scribe would have it written down. They'd have an accounting of the money. Then they gave the money which had been apportioned into the hands of those who did the work, who had the oversight of the house of the Lord, and they paid it out to the carpenters and builders who worked on the house of the Lord. So they have the contractors out there, and they're apportioning them money, saying, okay, how much money is this going to cost you? All right, well, this is my estimate for this. They give them that money to work on it, to get everything they need, to pay their laborers, to pay for the materials, to do that job. They're actually having a functional system now, instead of assuming these people are going to get the money and then they're going to give it. They have now a more broken down system for how to give out the money and how to get this work done correctly and functionally. And to masons and stonecutters, and for buying timber and hewn stone, to repair the damage of the house of the Lord, and for all that was paid out to repair the temple. However, there was not made for the temple of the Lord basins of silver, trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, any articles of gold or of silver from the money brought into the house of the Lord. But they gave that to the workmen, and they repaired the house of the Lord with it. So they weren't now spending the money on the finery that was in the temple, the stuff that the priests would use. They're not doing any of that. It's being solely used for the repair of the temple. Not so that you could spend 30% on rebuilding this wall and then go spend 70% on a new gold basin that you could use because that's what you physically have to touch and that you're going to have, and that's going to be yours because you're the one operating in the house of God. He's making sure that there can be no $400 million hammers that the government seems to find to be able to purchase. They're not having corruption in that way by buying these utensils that are overpriced and then ends up having a kickback attached to it is what normally happens. And I assume is probably what happened back then as well. Moreover, they did not require an account from the men into whose hand they had delivered the money to be paid to workmen, for they dealt faithfully. So they didn't require this direct accounting of every single penny being spent, because these men were to deal faithfully. They were dealing with the house of God. And as we find, unfortunately, even to this day, more often than not, the people in a church can be more faithful than the people who are operating the church. We see this when we see some very faithful people who get caught up in the ministries of Kenneth Copeland's and things like this. these prosperity preachers. Now, I have said and do believe a lot of people follow their greed into the hands of these people. But there are also people who are truly faithful, who go to these places thinking they're doing something God-honoring. And they are far more faithful in their service than the people who are actually leading the church. That is not true for all churches, and I would assume that's probably a minority, a very high minority of churches. But oftentimes they are high-profile churches, so they're the ones people are used to seeing. And it can be disheartening when you see high-profile people fall into disrepute. The money from the trespass offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. So the things that belonged to the Levites and the priests, that remained in their hands. They weren't taking what was God had ordained for the Levitical priesthood and appropriating that. That stuff still went to them. Although they were reorganizing how best to get the money into the hands of the people who could repair the temple, they were not going against the law of God and what he had commanded in way of paying for the Levitical priesthood and the Levites in the nation of Israel. Hazael, king of Syria, went up and fought against Gath, the Philistine area, and took it. Then Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And Jehoash, the king of Judah, took all the sacred things that his fathers, Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Azahiah, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred things, and all the gold found in the treasuries, the house of the Lord, and in the king's house, and sent them to Hazael, king of Syria. Then he went away from Jerusalem. Now we saw Elisha weeping when he anointed Hazael, knowing the evil that Hazael would do. But here we have a post-Jehoiada Jehoash. No longer does he at this point have Jehoiada with him. He is on his own. And you have an enemy of Israel, of Judah, coming to lay siege to Jerusalem, setting his face up to Jerusalem. And G. Campbell Morgan, in his exposition of the whole Bible, it basically gives overviews of every single chapter in the Bible. He refers to Jehoash here as a craven coward. Craven cowardice shown by the king of Judah. That in his first chance to stand up for his nation, he turns and gives up and loots the exact temple, the house of the Lord, his own house, and turns and gives up everything. All the instruments of the inside, all the gold in the treasuries, giving it all up for a chance to save his own skin. And it's interesting because we saw this happen with Ahab at one point. Ahab, looking to avoid war, gives over a ton of stuff. And then they ask for more. He says, well, hold on a minute. Hold on. Like, I paid you to leave us in peace. And now you come asking for more. I already paid you off. But that's the thing with paying people off. That's the problem that us growing up in the 80s learned very quickly, is that the villain in the movie, you can't give him what he wants because you can't trust him, because he's the villain. Hazael is an evil king of Syria, or some translations will have it Aram. Because Syria is the newer name, Aram was the more ancient name. He's the villain. If you give in and give him what he wants, there's nothing to stop him from taking more, because you've already shown that you won't stick up for yourself. There are times to acquiesce and to seek a non-violent solution to something. But when someone is wicked and all they're bound for is wickedness, acquiescing to their demands is not going to help. Jehoash would have been better off standing his ground and let the chips fall where they may. Hazael is a wicked, wicked man. Wicked, horrible things. We already saw what Elisha described him as going to do. Hazael was every bit as wicked as that. And Jehoash, knowing that, gives into him, thinking it was going to get him some level of peace. And maybe he did buy his peace in that time. But that peace is never going to be a long-standing peace. Peace is achieved through strength, not through weakness, not through cowardice. That emboldens your enemies. And this did nothing but embolden Hazael to be more wicked throughout his life. Whether that falls out in Joash or not, didn't matter. Because Joash would meet an ugly end himself. Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And his servants arose and formed a conspiracy and killed Joash in the house of the Milo, which goes down to Silla. For Josachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, struck him. So he died, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. Then Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. So even after all that, he's struck down in a conspiracy by his own people. Is it because he showed weakness? Or is it because he had departed from God? Is this the fate of someone who turns from God and shows cravenness to be a virtue? Is this what happens when you show sinful people that sinfulness is your reward? I don't know. We're not really told. We just know what kind of end he comes to. Death by conspiracy. Death by his own servants. Maybe a military coup. We know that Amaziah squashes that pretty quick, because as soon as he takes the throne, he has those two executed. But whatever the case, Jehoash, as fed into as he was, as long as he walked out his true faith in God because he had someone to keep him in line, the moment that bulwark was gone of a person holding his hand, essentially, his fall came rapidly. We need to make sure, I was earlier speaking about feeding into our own children, but we need to make sure that we are not only acting out a righteous walk with God because of those around us keeping us to account. It's good to have those people with us to keep us accountable. We're told to do that, to have people around us to keep us accountable, to walk a good and right relationship with God out. But we are also responsible for our own actions. We are responsible for our own decisions, and we will be held accountable for our own sin. And that means that we have a responsibility on our own to walk out a good and righteous walk before God. And we can't allow ourselves to fall by the wayside, to stray away. We have to actively walk the narrow path. We can't assume we were on it because we went to church as a child, which is what cradle Baptists do. We can't assume that because we were confirmed or baptized as an infant because our grandmother forced us to, as cradle Catholics are, that we suddenly have salvation for all time, which actually goes against Catholic teaching to begin with. But some people still believe that, because that's how ill-informed they are on their own denomination. We have to make sure that our walk with God is our walk with God. And that is a strong walk with God. It is a mindful walk with God. That we are walking it out in truth. We are walking it out in firm determination to make him to make him happy, and so that when we stand before him, we hear the words that so many Christians have heard and have always desired to hear. Well done, my good and faithful servant. That is what we want to hear when we get and have to stand before him, because we will have to stand before him. All will stand before him. That is what I wish to hear, and that is what I spend my time trying to be about. I don't do the works I do. I don't serve the way I serve to please my church, to please the assistant pastor I work under, to even get something out of God. God is not a gumball machine. I don't put out a good work and get a blessing out in return. I do it because I love him. I do it because he loves me. And I want him, in his love for me, to also be proud of me. And proud that I so proudly myself wear the title of Christian. That I proudly call myself a follower of Christ. I want him to have pride in that. To look at me and have a fulfillment in that. To take joy from that. That's what I like to see. That's what I would love to hear. That's why I do what I do. Because I want to make my Father proud of me. And I want my Lord, the one who I have submitted myself to say that I have been a good and faithful servant in all the things that he has called me to do. That is something we need to be mindful about and something we need to walk out. That is something that no one else can lead us by the hand towards. We have to do it ourselves. So use Joash as a cautionary tale of what happens when you're not walking it out yourself and you're just allowing yourself to be led by the hand. Because if you're allowing yourself to be led by the hand when that hand is no longer there, you're not going to know which path is the right path. Make sure you know which is the right path, and make sure you walk out a good and faithful walk for your Lord. Make your Father proud. Make your Father proud. That is where we shall end it for today. I hope this was fruitful for you. I hope to see you back again next time. But until then, be blessed.